everyone, and welcome back to the Bible Said What podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I am your host. If you want to get to know more about me or more about the podcast, be sure you go and check out our social media. We are on Instagram, TikTok, all of the things. You can find us there at Bible Said What with underscores between the words. And of course, as always, be sure to turn on notifications, subscribe whether you are on YouTube or Spotify, and take the Spotify poll because that is a new feature that I have discovered that we can do. So today we are entering into the second episode of our third season, and our third season is all about how we can pursue righteousness through living in right relationships with God, ourselves, and others. For our first episode, if you haven't listened to that, be sure you go back and give it a listen. We talked about how setting boundaries is a prime way that we can steward our relationship with others because it stewards our relationship with first our heart and with God's heart. So be sure you go and listen to that. And then today, we are talking about our relationship with the Lord through the aspect of Sabbath. And I do have a guest with me who I'm super excited to introduce. Dr. Leonard, would you like to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about what you do, who you are?
Absolutely, Elizabeth. It is great to be with you. I am a professor at Samford University in the Biblical and Religious Studies Department. And I started here way back in 2007 as an adjunct and then came on board in 2012. So this is my, 12th, 13th year, something like that.
Huh.
I went to a little college here in Birmingham and then went on to seminary in New York at Alliance Theological Seminary, and then finally got my PhD at a Jewish university up in Boston called Brandeis University. So I teach Hebrew and Hebrew Bible. That's my area.
Yeah, so you know just a little bit about what we're talking about today, just about Old Testament. Yes, that's awesome. Dr. Leonard has led, first of all, lots of my classes, but he's taken a lot of my friends to Israel. He does a yearly trip that is just amazing. And I love your passion for not only scripture, but just teaching. Dr. Leonard is the professor who's not afraid to cry in class. And I absolutely love it because he makes me cry too.
He is afraid to cry in class. He just can't help but cry in class. That's the problem. So.
No, I love it. I call my parents after your class and I'm like, you're never going to believe what we learned today. So yeah, today we're going to be introducing the topic of Sabbath because we were talking a little bit before we recorded this, just how Sabbath is something that we easily forget about in this modern day in hustle culture, and just the pace of life is so hectic. I feel like especially in the fall right now, at least for college students, it is so crazy. And so yeah, today we are just going to talk about Sabbath and what it means to truly sit and dwell with the Lord and how we can practice that in modern day through all of the chaos. Because as we talked about last week, our God is not a God of chaos. He is a God of peace and love and self-control.
Indeed.
So with that being said, let's just get right on into it. So,
well, as we discussed, one of the things that I think is so cool about Sabbath, there's actually a book, and it's called, importantly enough, The Sabbath, and it's by a great Jewish writer whose name was Avraham Joshua Heschel, and Heschel is he's so insightful in the way that sometimes he'll analyze different issues, and one of those is his way of looking at the Shabbat or the Sabbath. And he's got this great way of kind of sort of analyzing how the Sabbath fits into human life. And he starts off by saying that human beings really live in two different realms. There's the realm of space, and then there's the realm of time. And he goes through and he makes the case that as human beings, we are just so good at dealing with the realm of space.
yeah.
And what he means by that is like the physical world around us. And you just, at a certain point, you have to step back and marvel at how good we human beings are at manipulating the physical world.
Yeah.
And, when I'm in person, I'll usually hold up my iPhone at a certain point in time and say, I don't know how this magical device works.
Honestly. Yeah.
Somebody has figured out all the little intricacies that can make that work. And it's not just iPhones. I remember watching this program one time, and it was about they were taking walnuts and harvesting the walnuts and then getting them to market. And you think, okay, well, this is pretty pedestrian. Surely they've been doing this for thousands of years. The first part is they come up to the walnut tree, they grab it with a particular implement on a tractor and shake the thing until it just like in pure terror, it just says, okay, you can have the walnuts.
Yeah.
And so it drops them, they collect them, and you go, well, all right, that's fine. Well, some walnuts are good and some are bad. Mm-hmm. And you imagine like an episode of I Love Lucy where they're having to like pick them out like they do the chocolates and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not how they do it. They send them down this conveyor belt. A bank of lasers checks out the walnuts and then times it and blows out a little puff of air to push the bad ones into a different bin than the good ones. That's for walnuts.
Who thinks of those things?
Indeed.
That's crazy. It reminds me of like the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes, exactly.
With the bad eggs.
Yes, it's like you were waiting for, Veruca to get pushed off into the wrong bin there or something. And so Heschel's point is that when it comes to the world of space, we are just amazing. Mm-hmm. We conquer it so easily, but as good as we are in the world of space, we're equally bad in the world of time.
Right.
And the way you think about that is, our mastery of space is illustrated by the fact that we can measure it down to just the most precise detail. Mm-hmm. Time doesn't work that way.
No.
When you're in a class where there's a good lecture, you look up and 10 minutes later and the class is over.
Right.
You're in a bad lecture and it seems like
5 hours.
Oh, exactly. And then you look up
day.
and it's been 30 minutes.
Right.
And it's not just a lecture, but I always joke that with every degree that the temperature goes up outside in the spring, the class feels like it gets 10 degrees long or 10 minutes longer.
Right.
And so time for us is something that's ethereal. Mm. It's something that we have a hard time kind of really getting a grasp of and holding on to. And so Heschel makes the point, and it's such an insightful point, that because we're so bad at conquering the world of time, we try to compensate for it by living out our time ambitions in space.
Ooh.
So what he means by that is that we wish we had more time.
Yeah.
We can't get it. So what we do is try to get more stuff.
Mm.
And stuff is not a substitute for time.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much money you get. You're not adding any life onto the end of your days. And it's a terrible shame, on the one hand, to look back at the end of your days and go, wow, I wasted all my time just for a bunch of toys.
Right. Absolutely. That makes me think of, I know in my life, whenever I get into a really busy season, I tend to get into a mindset of, oh, I will be content. Like I'll be okay. It's hectic now, but I'll be great once life calms down. Or I will be able to stop and, really work on my relationship with the Lord after this season calms down. But sometimes life doesn't work like that. Sometimes one thing ends and another thing begins. And one thing that we talked about in the last episode is how if the enemy can't hurt us, because obviously like we are guarded by salvation, by the blood of Christ, he can't get to us that way, but he can make us busy, and we can make ourselves busy and have our internal peace dysregulated and thrown off by external brokenness.
Yeah.
And so that's another reason I think it is so important to really stop and rest in the presence of the Lord, so that way you can keep that in check. And that way you don't get in a mindset of, oh, I have to wait to be content or wait to be happy. Because then, like you said, that also is when we will try to overcompensate with space and with things. Because, I'm a female. Sometimes if I'm in a crisis, I'm like, I need a new pair of shoes. You know what I mean? Like I need a new outfit. I need a haircut. And that is simply not how that works at all. So moving into the next question is, what is the difference between resting and then Sabbath, and truly resting and dwelling with the Lord in Shabbat?
Well, it's kind of interesting because you can treat Shabbat as if it's something that's, really just a negative. And so these are the things that you're not allowed to do.
It's more of a regulation.
Exactly.
Right.
And there's a lot of, the kind of technical term is Sabbatarianism that defines itself by saying, well, you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this. And the problem is it kind of leaves this empty period where it's like, okay, well, I've cut out all these things, but what what's this day for?
Right.
Is it just a day of no's? And it's not that no's are bad. If you look at Psalm 1 says, oh, the happinesses of the person who, and then starts listing all the things they don't do.
Right.
Once you finish the things they don't do, though, it tells you what you do.
Mm.
And I've always kind of taken to heart a particular lecture that one of my professors in seminary gave, where he looked at the one song, and I'm forgetting even the number at this point. It's the psalm that is for the Shabbat in the Psalter. And he makes the case, and it's kind of complicated. You'd have to take Hebrew and look through it. But there's a particular word in Hebrew. It's ZMR. And that word can mean three different things. So one of the things that it can mean is to sing. One of the things it can mean is to pluck fruit, of all things.
That's so funny. Those are two very different meanings.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's kind of like with us with the word bat, right? Is that what you hit a ball with? Is it what you do with your eyes?
Or is it the flying thing?
Or is it the flying mammal,
in the woods?
Right?
Yeah.
So it's to sing, it's to pluck fruit, and then it's also, of all things, a wild ox.
Really?
All three of these little, items turn out to appear in that psalm. And he took the view that this was telling us what Shabbat is for. So it's to sing. So that's worship.
Yeah.
It's to pluck fruit. Now, this is not the laborious task of harvesting. This is apple picking in New England.
Yeah.
Where you go through and there's this just abundance of, fruit that's on the trees, and there's a nip in the air, and the leaves are turning, and you say, oh, yeah, I'll take this apple. Oh, this one displeases me. Oh, and so it's this magical kind of Robert Frost poem of leisure.
Yeah.
So there's worship, there's leisure, and then the wild ox in the psalm is skipping on the hills. It's play.
I love that image.
All three of those can make up what it means to do Shabbat. So you're worshiping, because worship's important on Shabbat.
Right.
You're relaxing, that's the leisure part, and then you play. Where we kind of get out of whack is when any one of those three dominates the others. If all you do on Shabbat is just spend 24 hours in prayer, you're going to grow to dislike Shabbat.
Right.
Because unless you're one of these medieval mystics who can do this, for most of it's more than we can handle.
Right.
Or it could be that it's all leisure. And so if you just end up being a couch potato, flipping through Instagram reels for the whole time, it doesn't turn out to be relaxing. You're more tired at the end of it than you were if you actually got out and did something.
There's no true fulfillment there.
Exactly.
Right.
And then it's the same with play. If all you do on Shabbat is recreation, well, then you're not really, it's like when you go on a vacation and when you come back, you need to rest up from your vacation.
It's like when you go to Disney for vacation. And
exactly.
Yes.
So Shabbat is sort of a balance among all three of those. And it doesn't mean that, it's 8 hours of one, 8 of the next, and 8 of the next. It may be that one Shabbat is a Shabbat for leisure, and one Shabbat is more focused on worship, and one Shabbat is more focused on play. But it's achieving that balance, because the real issue with Shabbat is its restoration.
Right. Absolutely.
In fact, that's even kind of the way that Heschel puts it, is that what Shabbat is for is to be a harbor from a storm. And so for 6 days of the week, we conquer.
Yep.
And we need a place where we can take our boat and turn it into that safe harbor and let it take us apart from our regular activities and achieve that rest, relaxation, and refocusing with God.
I love that. And going also off of that restoration, Sabbath also is a way to return us to God's original intent for creation. We were talking before this episode about how Sabbath was the culmination of creation and how God created the garden, He created Adam and Eve, animals, everything, and then He rested with them. That was the purpose of Him creating all of those things. And then, of course, man sinned and we stepped away from the presence of the Lord in that aspect. But now we live in the victory of salvation, where the Lord says, you can come to me anytime. You can, my doors are always open, basically. And He's waiting for us to do that. And so whenever we do honor the Sabbath day as holy, recognize it as something that is set apart because of the presence of the Lord, that returns us back to God's initial intent for creation, which is that true, meaningful relationship. And that's like the good for us. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the way you put that with the, enjoying the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's so fascinating about the creation week, when you look at it in Genesis 1 up through the very first part of chapter 2, is only one thing in the whole creation week is declared to be holy. It's the seventh day.
Sabbath.
And, when I'm teaching, I'll try to get my students to sort of, pick apart what does it actually mean to be holy. And a lot of them have heard the right definition before. It's to be set apart. Exactly. Yeah. So you think about it, it's something that's set aside for a special occasion, but there's another component to it. Things are set aside by virtue of God's presence. Mm. So if you are Moses and you're walking through the wilderness and God says, don't come any closer, take off your sandals, this is holy ground. Yeah. It's not holy ground. Mm-hmm. It's just dirt in the middle of the wilderness.
It's sand.
It's holy because God is there.
Absolutely.
You take the tabernacle. The tabernacle, it's just a tent.
Yeah.
And when God is not there, you can pack the thing up, put it on the back of a donkey, and drive across the wilderness.
Right.
It's only holy when God is there. So it's telling us something about that day. What is it that makes the Shabbat holy? It's because God is present there.
Right.
And I don't purport to understand exactly how that works any more than, any of our prayers when we say, Lord, be with somebody. Well, an omniscient and omnipresent God is pretty much like,
He's like, I'm already there.
I got the whole be with part there.
Yeah.
And yet God speaks that way.
Right.
I'll be with you. Wherever two or more gather together in my name, I'll be with you also. So there's some sense in which God's presence is focused. We tend to think of it in certain places. For the Bible, it's mainly in certain times. And so the Hebrew Bible does very little of sacred space. What it does is sacred times.
Yeah.
And the Shabbat is the quintessential example of that sacred time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in the Bible, the Israelites and, throughout the New Testament as well, Sabbath was a day. Like it was a set aside day. It was like ritual. I don't know if that's the right word to use. But yeah, it was backing up. It was sunset to sunset. And that was Sabbath. But nowadays, life is crazy. And sometimes we don't always have the space to set aside one specific day, sunset to sunset. I'm very blessed that I grew up in a household where we actually did celebrate Sabbath that way. My dad did his dissertation for his doctorate on Sabbath. And so I think that's one reason I'm so passionate about it, is because he really stressed that growing up, how important resting in the Lord is. But we actually would sit down at our table on Friday night and, we would make like cookies or something before to kind of celebrate. And then, we would light the candles and he would pray for us. He would read Psalms 31 to my mom. And then we would read a passage of scripture and just, be with the Lord as a family. And then at the end of Saturday, we would do the same thing. We did it on Saturday because Sundays, they're pastors, they work. But nowadays, I don't always have access to that as a girl in college. And that is my audience. I know a lot of people listening are kind of in the same boat. So how would you say in modern day, we can recognize Sabbath and not take any of the holiness away from Sabbath? How can we truly honor it as holy in kind of a modern day and age?
Yeah, it's a really tough issue. Because I think what we're left with is there's an ideal, and then there's a substitute, and the substitute's usually not as good as the ideal.
Right.
But, both have their places. I think in a perfect world, we would kind of do what you were talking about, is that we would do that. In my ideal world, there is the Shabbat and there's the Lord's Day.
Of course.
And so we would have the Shabbat, which is our day of, rest, pulling back. And then the Lord's Day is when we celebrate Christ's resurrection. And I think you can spot even places in the New Testament where they're continuing to do that.
Of course.
Paul's got a line where he says that on the first day of the week, collect, money that I can eventually put together as a gift for the church in Jerusalem. And you go, well, why on the first day of the week? It's because you're not allowed to handle money on the Sabbath.
Oh,
And so the first day of the week, Sunday, it's the Lord's Day, but it doesn't have those same kinds of, restrictions that Shabbat would have. So,
right.
so if I were doing it, I would say we ought to keep that Friday sunset to Saturday sunset as our Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that you have, it's very difficult to do those kinds of celebrations unless you're doing it with the community.
Yes. Which is why biblical community is so important. An example, but yes.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you think about how would your celebration or observance of Christmas look if you were in a place where nobody celebrated Christmas?
Be like the little Grinch Christmas tree with one little ornament.
That's
or the
it.
Charlie Brown Christmas tree, not the Grinch. Little Charlie Brown.
We get like a whole season of Christmas when everybody's doing it.
Right.
And I'm in the process of writing a book, and one of my chapters, I talk about how when we were in Boston, we were huge Pats and Red Sox fans.
Of course.
Well, we still like the Pats and the Red Sox, but it's different when not everybody's doing it. I'm not listening to sports radio every afternoon, and I can't tell you who the backup pitcher is, in AAA or something. It's not that they're not important. It's just hard to do them unless you're doing it with everybody else.
Yeah.
So if we don't have that community to do it, then what we have to do is find that substitute. And that's where what Heschel would say is we need to face sacred moments. And so to the degree that we can replicate that idea of stepping back and having that moment of restoration where we reflect on God, where we relax, where we recreate, those kinds of moments are important, even if they fall short, maybe, of being able to get that full Sabbath that we could celebrate with community. And, maybe if more people found meaning in those sacred moments, then maybe that tribe would increase.
Yeah.
And we could find other people that we would be able to do, Sabbath together.
Right.
And, our schedule and our society doesn't always work with it.
Hustle culture is such a problem. Yeah. That's why we're talking about this.
Even, something as pedestrian as my son's playing football in high school, well, that happens on Friday night. Yeah. And so it's one of those things that kind of interrupts it. It makes it hard. So you need to find substitutes for those moments because the principle's still the same, even if the symbol changes.
Of course.
It's sort of like with the food laws. It's not the food law about not eating pigs that's the important part. It was what were they trying to capture with that idea?
What's the heart of it?
Exactly. We want order, not chaos. We want life, not death. The value, the heart of it is more important than the symbol. So the heart of Shabbat, spending time with God, relaxing, recreating, that's the real heart that we want to try to recreate if we can.
Awesome. And I've also heard that honoring the Sabbath also increases your faith in the Lord because it shows your trust that He's going to provide. Because whether that be like a material thing, like the Israelites when they were wandering through the desert, the Lord would, send manna, send quail, and say, on Friday, collect as much as you need for today and the Sabbath. So trusting that the Lord will provide there. But also, I know for a lot of people, it's even something where my generation especially, we can get in a mindset of it's hard to not be doing anything because we feel like we have to be doing things to have value. And so in that way, it's the Lord providing us our identity as His child and not like we don't belong to the world in that. And so He's saying come back and return to that initial relationship that I created you for.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's interesting that you put it that way because it kind of circles back around to the way Heschel would put it.
Yeah.
Is to say that you can't conquer time by conquering space.
So true.
You have to face those sacred moments in time, not in space. And so it's something that's extremely difficult for us in our kind of, go get 'em culture.
Yeah.
Where we want to, that's another 24 hours. I could be doing stuff. I could be accomplishing stuff.
Right.
But all we're doing is accomplishing stuff in the realm of space.
Yeah.
And so there is an element of trust that's involved.
Absolutely.
That says, Lord, in the same way that I'm giving you 10% of my income as a way of saying all of my income belongs to you, I'm trusting you that you'll help me to be bountiful with, I don't have enough, even with 100%. So this is my sign that I'm going to trust you.
Wow, yeah.
8 days a week is not enough for me to get done everything I have to do. So how am I possibly going to get it done in 6? Well, it's a way of saying, Lord, I'm cooperating with you to know that 8 days, 10 days, 100 days isn't enough if I'm trying to do this just in my own strength.
Wow, yeah.
You know, there's a psalm, I think it's 121, it says, they labor in vain who build the house if they're not doing it with the Lord. And so it's a time way of doing the same thing you do in the tithe way.
It's tithing your time.
Exactly. Of saying, God, this is my sign that I'm going to trust you. And the result is, I mean, what does God say? He says, test me.
Yeah.
When have you ever gone hungry for as a result of tithing to me?
Yeah.
When have you ever done without as a result of observing my Shabbat?
Right.
Because you're enlisting me as a partner. I mean, we're like Moses, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Well, you're right, Moses. Yeah. You're nobody.
You can't do that.
But I'll be with you.
Wow.
So better to have 90% of your income and God. And I don't want to do the math, on air, but 6/7 of your time, and God, then 7/7 of it without God is the idea.
That's incredible. I've never thought of it from that perspective, but that is such an amazing point. I think that's probably a good one to end on. That's a pretty good mic drop. Do you have anything else that you would like to share? I mean, I'm loving your comments, and I've loved this conversation.
Well, it's first of all, I mean, what a treat. I mean, to get to be able to be with you and to talk about this. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that I miss from my time when we were in Boston. One of our greatest pleasures was being able to go to some of my Jewish friends' house, have that Shabbat meal, and it's such a meaningful experience where you have to kind of step back from all of the care and concern of the world, and then just enjoy time together.
Yeah.
If I added something to what we discussed earlier, it's easy to be really individualistic with your Shabbat and say, okay, I need to take an afternoon off.
Yeah.
The beauty of, the Jewish practice of Shabbat is it is not individualistic. It's we need to take time off, and then we come together and we eat a meal and we pray and we, talk and argue and reflect and so forth. I think as much as we're missing the stepping back, we're also missing the stepping forward into community with other people to celebrate those moments.
That is so true, because we were also created for community and to build each other up in those iron sharpening iron relationships with God and each other. And I think that just is a great end, because it points directly back to our theme, which is pursuing righteousness through living in right relationship with God, ourselves, and others. Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I have enjoyed this so much. If you are listening and you have also enjoyed this, be sure that you go and subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss another episode. The next episode I am recording with my besties, so that's going to be so fun and chaotic. So do not want to miss that. But that being said, we hope you all have a great week. And see you later.